Tomorrow is supposed to be our Freedom Day. At least according to some newspapers and politicians it is. Because of COVID, we've lost many of the freedoms that we took for granted in our society. Some freedoms we've given up voluntarily. Others have been made illegal in this country for the first time in centuries. And we've seen how reaction to this loss of freedom has varied over time. At first there was general compliance. We all stayed at home, stopped going out, and only took our short amount of exercise. And that surprised the government that we were quite so compliant. But since last summer there's been a growing restlessness. We've seen campaigns and marches against wearing masks, even though masks are designed to protect other people, and also against having vaccines. There are reports of people ignoring instructions to isolate or to quarantine, of people deleting the NHS COVID app from their phone so that they can't be contacted by Test and Trace and told to stay inside. But tomorrow, things will be different. Tomorrow, we will have our freedom back. But what do we actually mean by freedom? Personally, I'm always a bit wary when politicians or commentators use the word, because they generally use it to justify their own particular position or viewpoint. I remember hearing last month a politician from a southern state in America praising the generals who led the Southern Confederate armies because they were fighting for freedom. He completely ignored the fact that the freedom that he was speaking of was the freedom to continue businesses that exploited the slavery of thousands of Africans. His freedom, or his idea of freedom, required their slavery. This is perhaps an extreme example of what freedom has come to mean in our Western society. Put simply, the concept of freedom means putting our own wants and needs above those of everyone else, and then acting accordingly. It was even formalized as part of an economic theory by Milton Friedman in the last century, and has become widely applied beyond economics to influence our social and political ideas. This freedom means being able to do whatever we can get away with. Drive as fast as we like, park wherever we like, drink ourselves stupid, buy stuff at the cheapest price, not thinking or caring about the working conditions of the producers, ignore COVID quarantine or testing protocols if they will inconvenience us in any way. Just do what we think is best for us, and damn, quite literally, everyone else. But this is not what Jesus or Paul meant by freedom when we heard them using those words in our readings this morning. So let's look at those Bible readings again in a bit more detail, as they explain both the personal and the practical aspects of true freedom. John recorded Jesus talking about freedom at a personal, individual level. Reading from John chapter 8, verse 31 onwards. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Well, John often uses the word truth to refer to Jesus himself, and so here John is probably saying that it's through faith in Jesus that we are made free. But Jesus' comment clearly pricked the pride of some of his hearers. The next verse goes on. They, that is his hearers, answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham, and we have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Well, John must have been laughing his head off when he wrote this. The pompous reaction of these people was clearly ridiculous. Why? Well, because the two major defining events for the Jewish people involved them being slaves. There's the Exodus from slavery in Egypt, and there's the exile when Jewish leaders were taken away into captivity in Babylon. And so by saying we've never been slaves to anyone, they're denying their own history. And also, they're denying God's role in leading them out of slavery on those two occasions. Anyway, going on, the next verse. Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave doesn't have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." Jesus says that it's by being his disciples that we're made free from sin, and that is the freedom that matters. True freedom is not about putting our own wants and needs above those of everyone else and then acting accordingly. It's not freedom from wearing a mask, or from social distancing, or having to quarantine after a holiday. It is about freedom from sin. Sin being anything that separates us from God. And it's that liberating relationship with God, that freedom from sin, that each of us can have through following and trusting in Jesus. But there's more to God's freedom than that. In our reading from Paul's letter to the Galatians, we heard that Paul rejected the whole idea that freedom is about putting our own wants and needs above those of others. In fact, he explicitly states that it's quite the opposite. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, we heard, "For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another." Through love become slaves to one another? Wow! So freedom leads to slavery? Well, not quite. As he often does, Paul gets a bit carried away with his argument and his imagery. But the principle is clear. We should use the freedom that we receive from following Jesus to serve each other, not to somehow wallow in a sense of personal holiness or self-righteousness. And when Paul wrote those words, "through love become slaves to one another," he wrote in Greek. And he used the Greek word agape that we have translated here as love. And agape, as you probably know, means a special kind of love. It doesn't mean romantic love or sexual love or even sympathetic love. Those have different words in Greek. Agape is the type of love that involves an act of the will, not of the sentiment. It's the head more than the heart. It's not accidental or emotional. It's a deliberate choice. It's a practical, roll your sleeves up, get on with it type of love. A self-giving love that we may sometimes find ourselves giving through gritted teeth to people who seem to act as though they don't deserve it. This, Paul writes, is the reason God has given us our freedom. It is to serve one another in love. So, as Freedom Day dawns tomorrow, let's keep this perspective, that all the freedom we have is for us to use to help and support other people, not to use for our own selfish ends. Amen.